question of one of the things that was mentioned in the section on open source was about the sustainability of open source projects. So you've got a lot of people contributing, whether they're volunteers, they're making their first contributions, or whether it's kind of professionals in the workplace, people have built their companies out of it. A lot of people contribute towards open source. We need to think about the sustainability aspect of it. There's that old, I think it's an XKCD cartoon where you have this whole stack of modern cloud infrastructures, depends on a tiny little block that the thankless person in Nebraska has been maintaining for the past 20 years. So obviously we've got GitHub sponsors, which is a way where people can sponsor open source projects. But do you feel that GitHub sponsors goes far enough? Or do you think there's more things we could do? Or do you think the rise of licenses like the Redis source available licenses, that's going to allow companies to develop in the open, but still have a sustainable business model? Sure.
Well, I mean, I guess I have a little bit of a biased perspective on this. I don't think, I mean, to be completely honest, I don't think that the tip jar sponsors style stuff, I mean, it's nice, but I'm not sure that it's going to be sufficient for most people. I think the truth is that sustainability for open source comes from operating it for other people. And certainly that's what we do in Azure. That's what a lot of people do in various public clouds, or even in our open source partners like HashiCorp running, HashiCloud. I think that's really the most sustainable model, is an open source for all the values of community and collaboration. But the truth is that running software that in a reliable way is hard, and something that people are very willing to pay people to do. And so that's my feeling, is that's the route to sustainability for open source projects.
So yeah, Jake, it sounds like you've got a few.
Yeah, well, and I think this is one of the biggest tricks about the open source community, is that if you're brand new to something and you have an idea, and nobody else is really doing that kind of thing, and lots of folks kind of glom onto it, how do you monetize that and how you do this? I was joking about the Core.js piece earlier, but there are cases that are like that where, like you said, the XKCD case, where you have this very fragile area that folks are working on things, and not everybody is really familiar with that. And, not to say that we're the perfect model, but I think having that ability to put some financial backing behind something, to allow the community to work on it. But then, like Brandon's saying, is that to really have that ability to, from an enterprise perspective, or just, from folks who are consuming this for their businesses and whatnot, whether it's enterprise or just small businesses that are there, making it a lot easier for them to consume, whether they're cloud products or like a SaaS-based product like we have at the HCP, or any of the rest of the SaaS price product that are based off from open source software. And the trick is, like, how do you get to that point, from like the ideation point to everything? And if you listen to like somebody like Michio Hashimoto, he spent years on the circuit basically promoting Vagrant within the HashiCorp community, and it wasn't until that project really took off that became a viable success. And so, to some extent, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that comes with promoting an open source project. But in the case where something has a tremendous amount of relevance to the community, it's highly likely that the community will support it. And then you have that ability to then say, okay, maybe we can get funding for it. We can put some paid bodies behind it. And then we don't end up with, something like Core.js, where, there's one developer who's reaching out, sort of begging the community for money, which is, kind of ridiculous, if you ask me.
Because I guess the problem is you've got to pound the streets, as it were, as you're saying, like the Vagrant project. You've got to put that time in. You've got to put a lot of effort in up front to get your project to the point where it is monetizable. But if you build something that's small and doesn't sell, like curl, for example, how do you fund a small project like curl? It's not something you can sell, but there's somebody who's devoted the last 21 years or something to building that project. So how do you fund something small like that?
Well, I think there's a cultural thing too, is that like, I think we have all these core projects that are part of it. We at HashiCorp have the same thing. There's fundamental parts of our software that are open source projects. It was great. We had an outage with one of our customers back last year, and it just happened to be that we pushed over a piece of software that wasn't designed to scale to that level. And then you sort of have to look at that, like, how do we support those particular developers that we have, core pieces of our software that we're relying on those things. And to some extent, I almost feel like like from a vendor's perspective, as it begins to take off, the rising tide raises all ships, and we should be able to say, hey, look, if you have software that is being consumed by massively commercial products, I do think there should be some kind of a share model that that agrees with that. And I think that's more of a cultural shift than anything else, to say we do have these core libraries, should we have some kind of microtransaction type of deal that we help folks out with, that that are a part of that core software project. And then where does it go? I mean, a lot of our stuff is written in Go. Do we pay Google for for all the stuff that we've done within the Go project? I'm not sure if that's if that's the way that we go, but how do we actually share with folks that are so critical to our software environment? And I think that's a cultural shift that we should expect, that we would sort of raise the all the ships with the tide as it goes.
It's almost like an in-app purchase model in some ways, that every time you deploy an app to Azure, you have to spend 1 cent on getting this particular tool and 2 cents on this particular tool, and then all feed down to the creators.
I mean, I think it's a little bit, I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit thorny to get it hung up on money, I guess. I think that everybody, I guess from my perspective, I think everybody should just be aware that open source is something that a developer can walk away from at any time, right? And so I'd flip it around a little bit and say that, like, if you're using a piece of open source software, in some sense, you're gambling on the fact that the maintainer is going to be there, and if they walk away, you should know that you have to step up, right? Like, I think that's sort of the way that I've looked at it. Whenever, like, when you adopt a piece of open source software, you are making a commitment to that piece of software that it's going to stay healthy, and that you're responsible for keeping it healthy at some level. And money can be part of that, but I think also, like, teams, and I think we take this message out to a lot of our enterprise users who are maybe newer to open source, and say, like it's not a free lunch. Like, you don't just suddenly get all this software and have a bunch of people out in the community, in quotes, writing software for you, right? You have to be prepared to step up, and maybe it's a commons, right, where I'm not going to work on curl, but maybe I'll go work on some other library, and it all kind of works out. But I think people should just go in it with eyes wide open, that, like, it's not a free lunch. I don't know, but I think trying to figure out how you pay someone to maintain curl is maybe the wrong, like, a royalty model for curl is probably never going to work. But everybody who uses curl should understand that, like, there's a little bit of an IOU there that some human is going to have to step up and do at some point. So I don't know.
But I agree with you. I just think that there's sort of that cultural, not ignorance isn't the way to say it, just kind of ignoring the fact that there are lots of other folks that are sort of expectations that you might have, either carrying the torch or sharing some kind of finance with these folks. Again, I don't, royalty isn't really the right way of going about this. I agree with you on that either. But how do we think about either what's the cultural shift that we have to get to, that our expectations that free software is free. I mean, it's open source software, and I think that the mistake that a lot of folks make is that, yeah, you can get it for free, but it isn't actually something that's free. And again, I think that's a cultural shift that we almost have to, as leaders within the industry, to say, look, this isn't something that's actually free. There are some expectations that if you're going to consume from these people, that you may have to step up to the plate, like you were saying, or you may have to figure out a way of supporting those engineers in the long run, because they're so critical for your environment. So, like I said, I don't know how to solve the problem culturally. Like, I get it, I donate to certain things that are out there, but again, expecting everybody to do that seems ridiculous. But at the same time, like, how do we shift the culture? How do we make it so that people understand that we should support folks who have critical software that helps drive everything that we have around us?
You could almost think of maybe companies offering 20% time and spend that 20% contributing back to the open source projects that you depend upon. If you can't do cash, then have time. Can you get that kind of culture of, for every open source project you use, can you at least put one engineering day back to the project, maybe? But as you say, that's kind of a cultural shift, has to come from up top, because if you're asking leadership to give 20% time of a whole team of engineers, that's usually a hard sell if it's just to get something that you can get anyway for free.
Yeah, but I think it is worth saying. I mean, we do exactly this. It's not 20% time, but I have a dedicated team that focuses on upstream open source, right? I have a dedicated team that goes and builds and builds in open source, not because it's charity, but because we need to be making these communities healthy. And so I do think we do acknowledge that, especially in the cloud. We do acknowledge that need. We need to definitely make sure all of our customers who use open source know that too, and that is a bit of a cultural change at times. But I totally agree that it's really about people who use it and being willing to invest time. So.